I'm Heather, 38, and last weekend, my role as the family peacemaker backfired spectacularly. The harmony I'd worked my butt off to maintain, it blew up into a full-on nightmare at my parents' countryside home during our so-called perfect family dinner. My parents, with their polished smiles, demanded I play along with their charade of unity, and when I hesitated, the room went dead silent. "You're tearing us apart, Heather," my mother hissed, with everyone, my sister, her husband, even their family friend, staring like I'd betrayed them. But here's the tea. Their judgment didn't break me, it lit a spark. I'm not just pushing back, I'm about to unravel everything. A quick note, this story is copyrighted by the YouTube channel Brim Revenge. Reposting, revoicing, or editing this content without permission constitutes copyright infringement. Thank you for respecting original creative work. Now, back to the story. The drive to my parents' house felt like rolling into a lion's den. My daughter Freya sat beside me, her earbuds in, staring out the window. She'd been off since her great-uncle Henry passed 6 months ago, quiet, withdrawn, not herself. I'd tried talking, but she'd just shrug, her hazel eyes dodging mine. My stomach knotted, not just from worry for her but from the dread of facing my family. They had a way of making me feel like I was never enough, too emotional, too involved, too me. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration of togetherness, but I knew better. It was a stage, and I was expected to play my part, the dutiful daughter who nods and smiles. As we pulled up the gravel drive, the house glowed warmly, all white shutters and manicured roses. It looked perfect, but I could already feel the tension, like a storm brewing behind those windows. Freya grabbed her backpack, her fingers trembling slightly, and I squeezed her hand. "We'll be okay," I whispered, but her faint nod didn't reassure me. Inside, my mother greeted us with a hug that felt more like a pat-down, her perfume sharp enough to sting. My father stood by the fireplace, glass in hand, his smile as stiff as his starched shirt. My sister, Clara, and her husband, Greg, were already at the table, laughing with their old friend Martin, who always seemed to linger too long at these gatherings. The air was thick with forced cheer, and I braced myself, knowing this night would test me. Little did I know, it wasn't my role they'd question. It was Freya's secret that would shatter everything. The dining room's chandelier cast a soft glow, but it couldn't hide the familiar sting of being invisible. As we sat down, my mother praised Clara's latest promotion, her voice dripping with pride. "Regional manager at 35, can you believe it?" she beamed, while Clara basked in the attention, her perfectly manicured nails tapping her wine glass. I shifted in my seat, remembering how they'd brushed off my own milestones. Years ago, when I'd launched my small catering business, pouring every spare hour into it, my father had called it a cute hobby. Meanwhile, Clara's corporate climb was framed as the gold standard. At 16, I'd won a state poetry contest, my words printed in a local anthology. I'd brought it to dinner, heart pounding with hope, only for my mother to skim it and say, "That's nice, dear," before gushing over Clara's debate team trophy. The memory burned as I watched Freya pick at her salad, her shoulders hunched. She'd always been sensitive, like me, but Uncle Henry had seen her, really seen her, spending hours teaching her to sketch, calling her his little artist. His death hit her hard, and my family's dismissal of her grief only deepened her silence. I reached for the mashed potatoes, my fork scraping the bowl louder than I meant, and Martin, the family friend, raised an eyebrow. "Still making those little sandwiches, Heather?" he asked, his tone patronizing. I forced a smile, my jaw tight. "Catering events, actually, booked solid this month." He nodded, already turning to Greg to discuss stocks. My father didn't even glance my way, too busy praising Clara's strategic mind. I caught Freya's eye, hoping for a spark, but she looked down, her fingers twisting her napkin. The weight of being overlooked wasn't new. I'd carried it since childhood, but seeing it start to crush Freya was unbearable. I wanted to scream, to demand they see us, but I swallowed it, my throat tight. The dinner rolled on, their voices a blur of self-congratulation, and I felt like a ghost at my own family's table. Yet beneath Freya's silence, I sensed something more than grief, a fear I couldn't yet name. As my mother served dessert, her smile too wide, I promised myself I'd get through to Freya tonight, no matter what. The clink of forks and fake laughter filled the air, but my focus was on her, on the way her hands shook as she reached for her glass. Something was wrong, and I was done letting this family's neglect bury us both. Freya's silence at the table gnawed at me, her fork barely touching the roast. I'd noticed her withdrawal months ago, right after Uncle Henry's funeral. That day, she'd stood by his coffin, clutching a sketchbook he'd given her, her eyes red but dry, like she'd cried herself empty. Back then I thought it was just grief. Henry had been her confidant, the one who'd coax her out of her shell with stories and charcoal pencils. But as weeks passed, her spark didn't return. She stopped drawing, stopped talking about school, stopped smiling. I'd catch her staring out windows, her fingers tracing invisible lines on her jeans. One night, I found her curled up in bed, clutching Henry's old sweater, whispering, "He wouldn't let this happen." I pressed her gently, my heart racing. What wouldn't he let happen? She just shook her head, lips trembling, and said, "It's nothing, Mom." But it wasn't nothing. I started watching her closer, noticing how she flinched when Clara called, how she'd go quiet when my parents visited. I'd tried to bridge the gap, taking her for ice cream, asking about her day, but she'd give one-word answers, her eyes darting away. My gut screamed something was wrong, but I had no proof, just a mother's instinct and a growing dread. At the dinner, as Clara droned on about her corner office, I studied Freya. Her hands were tucked under the table, her knuckles white around her napkin. I leaned closer, whispering, "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded, but her eyes flicked toward my parents, then Martin, with a fear I hadn't seen before. My chest tightened. Henry's death had left her a small inheritance, his savings meant for her art school dreams. Had someone said something about it? My mother's voice cut through, offering me more wine with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I declined, my mind racing. Freya's withdrawal wasn't just grief, it was a signal, a plea I'd been too slow to hear. I vowed to get her alone after dinner, to make her feel safe enough to talk. As my father toasted to family unity, I gripped my glass, my resolve hardening. I'd failed to protect Freya from this family's neglect before, but not tonight. Whatever she was hiding, whatever had her so scared, I'd uncover it. The clatter of plates faded as I focused on her, my heart pounding with a mother's fierce need to shield her child. The morning of the dinner, I awoke with a pit in my stomach, the countryside house looming in my mind like a stage for judgment. Freya was still in her room, her door cracked open, earbuds dangling from her nightstand. I'd spent the week juggling my catering business, finalizing menus for a wedding, chasing late invoices, while worrying about her. She'd barely spoken since breakfast, her eyes fixed on her phone, scrolling through old photos of her and Uncle Henry. I knocked softly, leaning against her doorframe. "You ready for Grandma's?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She shrugged, tugging at her sweater's sleeve, and mumbled, "Sure." Her voice was flat, and it hit me hard. My vibrant girl was fading, and I didn't know why. I wanted to cancel, to stay home and hold her until she opened up, but my parents' expectations were a vice. "Family matters," my mother had said on the phone, her tone implying I'd already failed by hesitating. As we packed, I glanced at my laptop, where an email from a potential client sat unanswered, a big contract that could take my business to the next level. I pushed it aside. Freya was my priority. Driving through rolling hills, the house came into view, its white facade gleaming under the autumn sun. It was picture perfect, but I knew the script. My parents' warm welcomes masking their need for control, Clara's smug superiority, Greg's fake charm, and Martin's lingering presence, always too close to the family's orbit. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles paling. Freya stared out the window, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her jeans. "We don't have to stay long," I said, more to myself than her. She nodded, but her silence screamed louder than words. Parking, I noticed her hesitate, her hand hovering over the door handle. My mother's voice rang out from the porch. "There's my girls!" But her eyes scanned us like she was checking for flaws. I forced a smile, my heart racing with unease. Freya's distance, the family's facade, the weight of unspoken truths, it all pressed down. As we stepped inside, the smell of rosemary and roast filled the air, but it couldn't mask the tension. I squeezed Freya's shoulder, whispering, "I'm right here." She gave a small nod, but her eyes darted toward the dining room, where the others waited. Whatever was breaking her, I'd find it tonight, even if it meant tearing through their perfect charade. The dining room felt like a stage, all polished silver and pressed linens, but the air was thick with judgment. I sat across from Freya, her eyes fixed on her plate, while my mother orchestrated the conversation with her usual precision. "Clara, tell us about your new office," she cooed, her pearl necklace glinting as she leaned forward. Clara launched into a rehearsed spiel about her corner suite, her voice loud enough to drown out the clink of cutlery. I forced a nod, my fingers tightening around my fork as Greg chimed in, "She's basically running the show now." My father beamed, raising his glass. "That's my girl." The praise was a familiar knife slicing through my own efforts, unseen as always. Martin, seated next to Freya, leaned toward her, his smile too wide. "And you, Freya, still doodling?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Freya's shoulders stiffened, her fork pausing midair, and I shot him a look, my jaw clenching. "She's an artist," I said sharply, but he just chuckled, dismissing me with a wave. My mother pivoted, her eyes narrowing on me. "Heather, how's your little food thing going? Still playing chef?" The table went quiet, all eyes on me. I swallowed the sting, forcing a smile. "It's a business, Mom. We're booked through spring." She hummed, unimpressed, and turned back to Clara. The dismissal burned, but Freya's silence hurt worse. Her hands were under the table, her napkin twisted into a knot. I tried to catch her eye, but she stared down, her face pale. Greg launched into a story about his golf game, and Martin laughed too loudly, his hand brushing Freya's arm as he reached for the wine. She flinched almost imperceptibly, and my stomach churned. Something was off, more than their usual barbs. My mother's smile felt too tight, my father's glances too calculated. As they passed the gravy, their chatter felt like a performance, each word a polished lie. I pushed a piece of roast around my plate, my pulse quickening. Freya's foot tapped faintly under the table, a nervous rhythm only I noticed. I wanted to grab her and leave, but I needed to understand what was scaring her. The room's warmth was suffocating, their voices a relentless hum, and I braced myself, sensing the night was about to unravel in ways I couldn't yet predict. The dinner droned on, my mother's laughter grating as she refilled wine glasses, but my focus was on Freya, her hands now trembling under the table. As Clara boasted about her latest deal, Freya shifted, her knee brushing mine. I felt something crinkle, a folded piece of paper she pressed into my palm, her fingers cold and urgent. My heart stuttered. I glanced at her, but she kept her eyes on her plate, her breath shallow. I unfolded the note under the table, my pulse hammering as I read the scrawled words, "Call 911." The room spun. My fork clattered against my plate, drawing my father's sharp glance. "Everything all right, Heather?" he asked, his tone too smooth. I forced a nod, my throat dry, and tucked the note into my pocket, my mind racing. Freya's fear was real, tangible, and it lit a fire in me. I scanned the table, my mother's tight smile, Clara's calculated glances, Martin's lingering stare on Freya. Greg was mid-story, oblivious, but the air felt charged, like they were all in on something. I slid my hand to my phone, my fingers shaking as I typed, "What's wrong?" under the table, angling it toward Freya. She didn't look, but her foot pressed against mine, a silent plea. My mother stood offering dessert, her voice syrupy. "Freya, dear, help me with the pie?" Freya froze, her eyes flicking to me, wide with panic. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping. "She's fine here," I said, my voice sharper than intended. Martin raised an eyebrow and Clara's smile faltered. I gripped my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. Freya's note wasn't a prank, it was a cry for help, and every instinct screamed she wasn't safe. My family's chatter resumed, but it felt like a mask, their warmth a lie. I leaned toward Freya, whispering, "I've got you," but her trembling hands squeezed mine, urging action. I couldn't wait. As my mother returned with pie, I slipped my phone under the table, dialed 911, and muted the speaker, my heart pounding so loud I swore they'd hear it. The operator's faint voice answered, and I murmured, "Emergency at 142 Willow Lane, please hurry," my voice barely a whisper. Freya's eyes met mine, brimming with fear and trust, and I knew whatever came next would shatter this family's facade forever. The operator's voice crackled faintly through my phone, asking for details, but I kept it pressed against my thigh, my eyes locked on Freya. Her face was pale, her fingers digging into her napkin as my mother set the pie down, her smile a brittle mask. Who wants the first slice? She chirped, but the cheer felt hollow, like a performance about to crack. I whispered to the operator, "My daughter's in danger, please send help," my voice low, barely audible over Greg's booming laugh about some golf anecdote. Then a chair creaked. Martin leaned toward Freya, his hand grazing her shoulder. "You're awfully quiet tonight," he said, his tone oily. Freya flinched, her eyes darting to me, and that was it. I stood, my chair scraping loud enough to silence the table. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fury. My father's glass paused midair, his brow furrowing. "Heather, sit down," he said, sharp and commanding. But I didn't. I held up Freya's note, my hand trembling. She wrote, "Call 911. Why?" Clara's fork clattered, her face paling, and Martin's smile vanished. My mother laughed, a high, nervous sound. "It's just a joke, right, Freya?" But Freya shrank back, her breath hitching. I stepped closer to her, my phone still connected to the operator. "No more lies," I said, my voice steady now. "What did you do to her?" The room froze. Then, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, and Clara gasped, "You didn't." My father's face darkened, but before he could speak, police burst through the front door, boots heavy on the hardwood. "Hands where we can see them," an officer barked. Chaos erupted. Greg shouted, Martin stammered excuses, and my mother clutched her pearls, crying, "This is a misunderstanding." But the officers zeroed in on Freya, who pointed at Martin, her voice breaking. "They gave me pills, said it was for my nerves, but I kept forgetting things." My stomach dropped. The police found a bottle of sedatives in Martin's jacket, and Clara's panicked glance at my parents confirmed it. They'd been drugging Freya, manipulating her to sign over Henry's inheritance. As officers cuffed them, my mother sobbed, "We were protecting her." But I saw the truth. Their greed had poisoned everything. I pulled Freya close, her tears soaking my shirt, as the police led them away, their perfect facade shattered. Freya clung to me as the police escorted my parents, Clara, Greg and Martin out in handcuffs, their protests echoing down the gravel drive. The dining room, once a stage for their polished lies, was now a mess of overturned chairs and shattered glass from Greg's dropped tumbler. My mother's wails, "Heather, how could you do this to us?" faded as the squad car's lights flashed through the windows. I held Freya tighter, her body trembling against mine, her breath ragged. The officers had taken her statement, her voice barely above a whisper as she described the vitamins they'd forced on her, the foggy days, the papers they'd pushed her to sign. My heart broke with every word, guilt clawing at me for not seeing it sooner. I turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her tear-streaked face. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I whispered. She nodded, her eyes raw but trusting. The lead officer approached, his notepad out. "We'll need you both at the station for more questions," he said, his tone gentle. I nodded, but my gaze swept the table, my mother's abandoned pearls, Clara's half-eaten pie, Martin's empty chair. Their betrayal burned, years of their neglect now twisted into something monstrous. I stood, helping Freya up, her hand small and cold in mine. "Let's go," I said, my voice firm despite the ache in my chest. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit us, and I faced the house one last time. "You thought you could break her," I said under my breath, my words for them, for their greed, their hypocrisy. "But we're stronger than you." Freya squeezed my hand, a spark of her old fire flickering in her eyes. The police had uncovered texts between Clara and Martin, plotting to secure Freya's inheritance, with my parents' approval. Their polite masks had hidden a calculated conspiracy, and I'd been too blind, too caught in their script, to see it. No more. I guided Freya to our car, ignoring the neighbors' curious stares from their porches. As we drove away, the house shrinking in the rear view, I felt a weight lift, not relief, but resolve. They'd tried to steal her future, but I'd make damn sure they'd never touch her again. Back at my apartment, the quiet was a balm after the chaos of the countryside house. Freya sat on the couch, wrapped in a quilt, her sketchbook open but untouched. I'd called my best friend, Lena, and her husband, Tom, who arrived with takeout and soft smiles. They weren't blood, but they were family, real family. Lena set a steaming container of pad thai on the coffee table, her eyes soft as she glanced at Freya. "You okay, kiddo?" she asked, her voice warm. Freya nodded, managing a small smile, her fingers tracing the quilt stitches. Tom plopped down beside her, pulling out a deck of cards. "Wanna lose at Go Fish?" he teased, and for the first time in weeks, Freya laughed, a sound that loosened the knot in my chest. I sat across from them, sipping tea, the contrast stark against the memory of the dinner's cold perfection. There, my mother's smiles were calculated, her affection a transaction. Here, Lena's hand on my shoulder was steady, no strings attached. I watched Freya deal cards, her movements hesitant but lighter, and thought of the dinner table, Clara's smug grin, Martin's creeping hands, my parents' rehearsed warmth. They'd never seen Freya, not like Henry had, not like Lena and Tom did now. Lena caught my eye, her brow furrowing. "You holding up?" she asked quietly. I shrugged, my throat tight. "I should have known," I said, my voice cracking. "They were hurting her and I missed it." Lena squeezed my hand. "You didn't miss it tonight." Her words settled over me, easing the guilt just enough. Freya glanced up, her eyes meeting mine, and I saw gratitude there, fragile but real. Tom exaggeratedly groaned as Freya won a round, and we all laughed, the sound filling the room like a shield against the past. This was what family should be: messy, honest, safe. I tucked a strand of Freya's hair behind her ear, my heart swelling. The dinner had exposed my blood family's betrayal, but here, with Lena's quiet strength and Tom's goofy humor, I saw what Freya needed, what we both needed. We weren't alone. As the night deepened, Freya leaned against me, her sketchbook still open, a pencil now in her hand. She was drawing again, and that small act felt like a victory. The next morning, sunlight filtered through my apartment's curtains, but the weight of last night lingered. Freya was still asleep, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, and I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold. My phone buzzed with messages from Clara. Pleas, excuses, then accusations. "How could you destroy us?" I deleted them, my fingers steady but my chest tight. The police had called earlier, confirming charges: fraud, false imprisonment, drugging a minor. My parents, Clara, Greg, and Martin, were detained, their scheme laid bare in texts and forged documents. They'd planned to siphon Freya's inheritance, using sedatives to keep her compliant. The betrayal cut deeper than their years of neglect, but I was done letting it define us. I opened my laptop, drafting an email to my lawyer about protecting Freya's assets. My hands shook as I typed, anger mixing with resolve. I'd always bent to their expectations, swallowing their slights to keep the peace, but no more. I blocked their numbers, my thumb hovering over Clara's last message before I erased it. Freya stirred, padding into the kitchen, her eyes puffy but clearer. "They can't hurt me anymore, right?" she asked, her voice small. I pulled her into a hug, her head resting against my shoulder. "Never again," I said, my voice firm. I outlined new rules: no contact with them, therapy for Freya, and a restraining order if needed. She nodded, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt, but I saw a flicker of relief. Later, I called Lena, who offered to help with legal fees, her voice steady over the line. "You're not alone in this," she said, and I believed her. I glanced at Freya, now eating cereal, her sketchbook open again. My catering business had a big contract pending, and I'd use every cent to secure her future: art school, therapy, whatever she needed. The family I'd known was gone, their lies exposed, but I was building new walls, ones they couldn't breach. As Freya hummed softly, sketching a bird, I felt a shift, not peace yet, but strength. We'd face the fallout together, and I'd make damn sure no one dimmed her light again. Freya's sketchbook was open on the kitchen counter, a half-finished drawing of a sparrow taking shape, its wings bold and free. I watched her pencil move, each stroke a small rebellion against the fog my family had forced on her. It was a week after the dinner, and I'd thrown myself into rebuilding our lives. My catering business was thriving, a new contract signed yesterday, a gala for 200 guests, and I funneled every resource into Freya's future. I'd contacted an art school in the city, securing a meeting to discuss scholarships for her. Her eyes had lit up when I told her, a spark I hadn't seen since Henry's death. Sitting across from her now, I sipped my tea, my laptop open to emails from our lawyer. The case against my parents, Clara, Greg, and Martin, was airtight. Bank records showed they'd already siphoned a chunk of Freya's inheritance into an offshore account. The betrayal stung, but I channeled it into action. I'd started a blog, Reclaiming Us, to share our story anonymously, hoping to help others trapped by toxic families. Comments poured in, strangers sharing their own battles, their words a lifeline. I glanced at Freya, who paused to sharpen her pencil, her brow furrowed in focus. "You're good at that," I said, nodding at her sketch. She smiled, shy but real. Uncle Henry would have liked it, she said softly. I nodded, my throat tight. My family's name, once a weight of expectation, was ours to redefine. I'd organized a memorial for Henry, a small gathering where Freya could display her art, honoring his belief in her. It wasn't revenge, it was reclaiming what they'd tried to steal: her talent, our bond, our worth. My phone pinged, a text from Lena about joining us at the memorial. I typed a quick reply, my fingers steady. The gala contract meant stability, a chance to move us to a brighter apartment, away from memories of that countryside house. As Freya added shading to her sparrow, I saw our future taking shape too. Stronger, freer, ours. They'd tried to break us, but we were rewriting our legacy, one determined step at a time. Freya's memorial for Uncle Henry was this morning, and as I stood in the community center watching her hang her sketches, I felt a quiet shift inside me. The room was small, filled with soft light and the hum of friends, Lena, Tom, and a few of Freya's art classmates. Her drawings lined the walls, each one vibrant, a testament to her healing. She lingered by a sketch of Henry's old oak tree, her fingers brushing the frame, and I saw peace in her eyes, not pain. I'd spent weeks pouring my energy into her recovery, my business, our new life. But now, standing here, I realized something deeper. My worth wasn't tied to their approval. My family's betrayal, drugging Freya, chasing her inheritance, had shattered their facade, but it hadn't broken us. I'd always sought their validation, bending to their script, but no more. I walked over to Freya, my shoes clicking on the hardwood, and squeezed her shoulder. He'd be so proud, I said. She smiled, her eyes bright. I think so too. Later, as guests mingled, I stepped outside, the autumn air crisp against my skin. My phone buzzed. An email confirming another catering contract, a big one. It wasn't just money, it was freedom, proof I could build something without them. I thought of my blog, the stories flooding in from others who'd survived toxic families. Their words echoed my own: we were enough. I looked back through the window at Freya, laughing with Lena, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. We'd faced their lies, their greed, and come out stronger. My worth wasn't in their eyes, it was in Freya's trust, in the life we were carving out. I took a deep breath, the weight of years lifting, and felt peace, real and steady, settle in my bones. So what do you think? Did I protect Freya fiercely enough, or should I have seen their betrayal sooner? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and if you've ever had to break free from a toxic family, share your story. I'm reading every one. This journey taught me that our worth isn't in others' approval, it's in the love and strength we build ourselves. Freya's drawing again, and I'm building a life where she can soar. You can too. Subscribe for more stories like ours where we reclaim our power and rewrite our legacies. Keep fighting for your truth. It's worth it.